and welcome to the Plenty of Positivity podcast. I am your host, Courtney Beck, and today we have a very special guest, Dr. Chelsea Ale. Dr. Ale is a professor in sport management at the University of Alabama, and she was recently elected president for the U.S. Professional Diving Coaches Association. It is my absolute honor and pleasure to welcome Dr. Chelsea Ale.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Well, Chelsea, I am so excited for this. I want to let our listeners know kind of how we got to know one another. So Dr. Chelsea Ale and I, we met in the FSU Sport Management PhD program, and we quickly bonded, at least from my point of view, with sport. Dr. Chelsea Ale will certainly go into this, but she was a diver at the highest level. And while I was not necessarily a diver, I was a gymnast. So we always spoke a lot about those practices growing up, all those lessons. And of course, that's what this podcast is all about. So, Dr. Ale, if you could please start us off with an introduction and a background of yourself.
Sure. Yeah. So it's been great getting to know Dr. Beck and, seeing how you've grown and developed. And it was really nice connecting in our PhD program just because I feel like we are very similar about a lot of the things. And so it was nice to have like-minded person to talk to. For me, I guess most of my background is in sports. So I grew up diving, but my goal was to be an Olympian. So when I first started sports, I was a swimmer and a gymnast. My first swim meet, I was 3 years old, and I was like, I want to be an Olympian. And so we tried to do that. We moved to Washington State, and they didn't have anywhere to sign up for gymnastics. And so I was like, well, I can combine my love of swimming and gymnastics and become a diver. And so then my life kind of just became obsessed with diving, and I did it. We traveled the country for a year, and my parents were able to still let me train with diving. We moved to the number one diving team in the country so that I could train with them. Then we moved to the number two team in the country so my dad could work there, but I could train with them as well. I competed nationally and internationally as a diver. I went to NC State for college. And so it was really nice to kind of develop that. And then I tried to figure out what I wanted to do after. And I thought I wanted to be a college coach. And so I coached at 2 different Division I universities. And I did that for a little bit. I also got my master's at Florida State University and was a graduate assistant there and helped them with the diving team. I've run camps and clinics. I helped turn a small diving camp into the largest diving camp in the world. I'm really proud of all that we did there. And it was a great experience. And then I'd also moved to Tallahassee, Florida, and got my PhD. All while I was coaching, I also had a whole nother side of my life, which was the hospitality side. And so I figured, I'm a workaholic, always got to be trying to do something. And so I was bartending, a corporate trainer. I traveled around the country opening restaurants. I worked at a winery. I did marketing and promotion, all sorts of different things simultaneously while I was doing that. So I always tell people I have my sports side and my hospitality side. And then while I was getting my PhD, I worked at our Civic Center in Tallahassee. So I was in charge of catering and suites and at times concessions in the bar. So basically I was in charge of a lot of the food and beverage, and we did concerts and shows and basketball games and things like that. And so really got to work full time in the industry while I was getting my PhD, which was a challenge, but I'm here. And so now I'm at the University of Alabama, and I'm a professor in the sport management field. So it's been a journey. I always tell people I have 2 sides. I have my sports side and my hospitality side. And sometimes they get to intertwine together, which is nice.
That is fantastic. And Dr. Ale, wow, you have done literally everything from physically, obviously, being involved in sport. But as you mentioned, I mean, hospitality in sport, building clinics and programs in the realm of diving. And obviously, like you said, I mean, just building very large clinics that would expand, that obviously touched so many lives of those athletes, particularly obviously in the realm of diving. But Chelsea, I'm thrilled to get into this discussion conversation. Obviously, we're going to be talking about a multitude of different topics. You have been in education, obviously, going to talk about the concept of leadership and hospitality and coaching, which I cannot wait to literally dive into. Of course, no pun intended there. But let's go ahead. I would love to start. You obviously had mentioned your whole journey in diving and everything that that brought you. But when we talk about even just lessons, I love kind of reflecting back on the sport that maybe we grew up in and how that really would lay such a solid foundation. So, could you maybe speak to maybe the lessons that you learned in the sport of diving?
Sure. So, I mean, I always tell people all the time, I would not be the person I am today if it wasn't for diving.
Yeah.
It taught me everything, like, time management, goal setting, how to handle fear, how to overcome obstacles, how to handle challenges. And so, like, for me, diving was about so much more than just the physical aspect of it in the sport. I had my ups and downs like anyone else, career goes great and you get injured. Like, there's always a challenge there, but diving helped me really kind of figure out exactly like the type of person I am. I am a workaholic. I want to be the best in everything that I do, and I want to be better than everyone. And I think diving sort of like helped me kind of get that competitive nature. But it helped me really work with like setting goals and having time management skills where I'm able to do multiple things at one time and be able to make it work. And like I said, you have challenges in the sport, and I think that that really helped me overcome them. As younger
Mhm.
athletes, I don't think I overcame them as well as I get older, just because setbacks can become frustrating. But that's why I love the sport because it was so much more about all the life lessons and not just about the sport. But I also loved it because it's one of the only sports where you actually cheer for your competitors. Like
Yeah.
my best friends were divers too, and I wanted them to do the absolute best that they possibly could. Now I wanted to win, but I also wanted them to do well. So it's like if you win and you beat me, like I am so happy for you and I'm so proud of you. And if I beat you, then you're happy for me. And I don't think you find that in a lot of sports. And
Yeah.
so for me, it was huge in diving that we could have that like social network where you cheer each other on, you get excited for each other, you want the best for them, while you still can remain competitive. Like I'm not going to dive worse hoping that you win, but I am absolutely going to cheer you on when you do something really well. And I love that aspect of it because I feel like in a lot of sports, it's like, oh, we can't talk to them. They're on the other team. Or in diving, it's like, oh my gosh, I get to see all my best friends from around the world. Let's enjoy this time together that we have.
No, that's fantastic. And just talking about those lessons, I mean, I think about discipline. I am so grateful for the sport of gymnastics, particularly pertaining to discipline. And as you mentioned, time management. It sounds cliche, and I've said that before, but at the same time, I really feel as you make your way into your professional career, like you said, being a workaholic, doing everything to the best of your ability, I really do feel that I learned that, particularly those lessons from sport. And so I'm always so grateful just to be able to reflect. And pertaining to your story, I just have to mention, and I know you've obviously mentioned it in your introduction, but not only were you a diver at North Carolina State, but even before that, you excelled in the sport of diving at the highest level, making it to the junior worlds and the masters worlds as well. So, before we even get into coaching, because I definitely want to talk about that transition from athlete to coach, but those particular experiences, how did that kind of shape you, those lessons that you would learn making it to the highest level to ultimately help you into your professional career in coaching?
So, yeah, so when I was 14, I qualified for the Junior World Championships in Aachen, Germany. And it was definitely an interesting experience because you got to see all the top athletes from around the world competing, training. I was so proud to represent my country and just to be
Yeah.
there. And I felt like all that hard work that I had been putting in, all the sacrifices that I had been making, had
Mhm.
really sort of helped me handle that. But
Sure.
I will say, when I went to Worlds, I was doing something into a foam pit, which is kind of like those gymnastics foam pits,
Sure.
and I fractured my leg. And so I ended up competing on a fractured leg. And got 19th place, but when I went home, that was really tough for me. It took me a couple years to actually recover from it because I didn't get the help I needed right away, which is partially my
Yeah,
fault. I wanted to compete and train, and I didn't want to be taken out of that element.
sure.
And so, to say that going to Worlds was like the best positive experience for me, it actually taught me how to kind of overcome more troubles and issues because in my mind, this was the beginning of like the trajectory of my career. And instead, I got an injury that unfortunately made me have to have like a huge step back from it. So that was
Mhm.
definitely challenging, but it made me a better coach because it made me like realize like what to push athletes through, what not to push athletes through, and things like that. And then Masters Worlds, so I came out of retirement in
Wow.
2023. And so I was diving in 2023 for a couple months. And I went to the Masters World Championships, which was very stressful, but it was a lot of fun. I went to nationals, and 2 weeks later, I was in Japan for the Worlds. My first event, I got first place. So I got to be a Masters World Champion the first day. So by the end of it, I was first, second, third, fifth, and fifth. And that experience was one of the best experiences of my life. Being involved in masters diving, it's for adults, not children.
Sure.
Um, it is all about like fun and happiness and enjoying yourself and creating a positive experience. Now, granted, most of us want to win and we want to succeed and we want to do well. So that competitive nature is still there, but
Sure.
it's so positive and supportive. And I was finally doing diving again for me. I was doing it because I loved it. I wanted to do it. I enjoyed it. And yes, was I hard on myself because I'm older now and I'm not in the shape that I used to be in?
Mhm.
Absolutely. So that was definitely challenging for me, but it really got made me see diving in a different way as an adult, and that these people around the world are doing the sport at ages that I can't even imagine trying to dive. And so it was really kind of like eye opening to be at Worlds and just see the caliber of the athletes. And it just shows that regardless what age you are, you can still be incredibly competitive. And so that was probably one of the best experiences of my life.
That's unbelievable. And I want to ask you some questions on this because I mean, obviously different sports. I could not even imagine just flipping in gymnastics right now, quite frankly. Sometimes I think gyms actually do have, like a adult gymnastics night type thing, but I don't think I could like physically flip anymore to the extent like, relatively speaking as to what I used to before. But I would love to hear just that journey of training upwards to obviously receiving that first place medal.
Sure. So this is actually what my dissertation was on. It was on, getting back in the pool, doing an ethnography, and feeling what it was like to be in that moment. And so, if you had asked me if I was an athlete 20 years ago, like my entire life was an athlete, like that was my identity. I was a diver through and through. And then as I got older, it's not really part of your identity. I stopped coaching and I was working on my dissertation and my PhD, and I did not consider myself an athlete. Like I was out of shape. It was very discouraging. And then I just started getting back into diving. And the first couple of days, it's like that imposter syndrome, and you're like, I don't know if I should be here. But some of the things came back super fast. Like you'd be surprised at what your body can still do. Now, I'm not as strong or as fast as I used to be, but like all of those mechanics and things that I learned as a kid that were drilled into my brain about staying tight and doing the proper movements, they're all still there. And so my body might not like me as much today, but it's all there. And so I have no doubt you would absolutely be fine doing gymnastics. But it was a process. I slowly got into it because I knew I could get hurt a lot easier now. I knew that it'd be a little bit more challenging. And so I made sure I was doing like little steps. Some days went great and I was really proud of myself. And some days I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this. I'm old and out of shape. But when I went to nationals, it really kind of like hit home, and I was like, I'm an athlete again. Like I am, like this is my life. Like I'm an athlete, and I was so excited about it. And then I think I actually tore both of my shoulders when I was at nationals.
Oh my
And
god.
so I was like, do I go to Japan for worlds? Do I not? Like, and I was like, you know what? Yes, I'm going to go. So I went. Like I said, it was an amazing experience. And my plan was to keep diving and stick with it. But I had to recover from the injuries that I gave myself. And here in Tuscaloosa, I haven't figured out how to actually get
Yeah.
back into diving in the facility here yet. But it was interesting, the journey, because I went from no longer considering myself an athlete to being a national and world champion and being like, okay, yeah, I still got it. I might be old and out of shape, but I can still do it.
Well, and I think it really speaks about like the passion towards something that we pursue in life. And I really do. I think there's something to be said about that athletic identity. And you were definitely speaking about that just like through this conversation. But I struggled with that coming out of the sport of gymnastics. And I do think it's something that's real. I mean, it's like cold turkey, you just stop one day. And I could remember coming home thinking like, gosh, what do I do next? I never even really prepared for life after sport. I mean, sure, you go to maybe a career fair or two, but to really understand how to like navigate that next, whatever it is, if it's going back to school for your master's or if it's entering into the professional workforce, that was something I certainly struggled. But my gosh, like what an accomplishment, Dr. Ale, just to be able to say, like, that was last year, you said, right? 2023, you just accomplished that.
Yes.
And not to mention, PhD too, that program was so intense. I mean, rightfully so. Obviously, you're trying to, achieve that terminal degree, but to also pair that up with being like physically an athlete again. So huge props to you, Dr. L. That's a massive accomplishment to accomplish both earning your PhD and, of course, winning that medal at the Masters World. So big congratulations.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely like, for me, when I stopped diving the first time, my whole
Mhm.
identity was wrapped up as a diver. And I didn't know how to handle that not diving. It was so interesting because I was like, this is all of me. Like, what do I do now? And I actually couldn't go to a pool for a little bit because it was so hard to remove myself from that. And so I think it's nice the older you get coming back to a sport and doing it, and not like your whole identity is not identity like in that, but
Yeah.
that it's now like part of you. So it's like I'm Dr. Ale, I'm Chelsea, but I also dive. Not the only thing about me is that I'm a diver, which I think when I was younger, the only thing that I identified with was an athlete. And when that was taken away from me, I was like, I don't know what to do with my life now. So
No, that's totally understandable. And I mean, I think too, when you were even talking about when you were getting back into the sport of diving, obviously, like we just said last year, but there is something to be said about muscle memory. Just speaking from the sport of gymnastics, but I could remember I stopped the sport when I was, I don't know, I think it was like 13 or 14. I returned my last, I think it was in spring of my senior year. And when I was starting to gain my skills back after those 3 years of being like completely out of the sport, once you gain that strength back, I feel kind of that air sense of flipping, you return back to kind of where you were before. But I don't know, can you speak about that? Because that was at least my experience. But if you don't mind speaking on like the strength and like getting everything back quickly.
sure. So it was funny. Before I went to the pool the first day, I had all these dreams that I couldn't even stand on the diving board. I was just going to fall right off. I was like, I have no balance. Like, I'm going to fall off. And I stood on the end of one of our dry boards, which are the ones that are on land. And I was just bouncing and I was like, okay, I can do this. Like, and then I was practicing hurdles and takeoffs and I was like, okay, I can do this. I was like, but I don't know if I'm going to flip my body around. Like, we'll see. And so I went on the trampoline first and I just started like flipping and moving. And I was like, oh, yeah, my body can do this. Now, I didn't spin as fast as I used to because I wasn't as in shape or as strong. But all the air awareness comes back for the most part. There's
Mhm.
definitely a couple things that I've done where I'm like, not really sure how that went. Um, but I remember there was one day I was gonna do like my favorite dive is a really hard dive. And every time I get in the pool, I used to do it. And I was like, it's been like 5 years since I've done this. I was like, well, I'll do it. It'll be fine. And I got up there and I did it. And everyone's like, how did you do that? Like, you haven't dove in forever, but like I knew exactly where my mind was. It was back 1.5 flips with 2.5 twists. And it wasn't great. But I knew exactly where I was because it was drilled into my head for the first 20 some years of my life. And so your body just kind of like knows. Now, figuring out where you are like level wise compared to the water and stuff is a little bit different, but it it really comes back easily. Now, again, I cannot do the things as hard as I used to, but the basic stuff, it's all there because it's been drilled into your brain for so long that it doesn't go anywhere. It's just a matter of like getting yourself confidence to do it, which I think that might have actually been the hardest part was being like, you'll be okay,
Yeah.
where I was kind of afraid that I was going to get hurt. And so that made it scarier, but the air awareness just sticks with your body forever, I feel like.
It's so true. And like just talking about obviously like just the immense amount of experience that you've had in the sport as an athlete, as you would transition out of diving physically as an athlete and you would enter into coaching, you were obviously a head coach at two D1 programs. So, could you speak to that transition and how you've been able to help athletes when you were a head coach?
Sure. So for me, when my diving career ended, I was like, I don't know if I want to be involved in diving. Like, I need a break from it. And then I realized I really do miss it and I love the sport of it. But, as an athlete, you have really great coaches and you have coaches that might not have been as great.
Sure.
And I always believe that you should always be learning and growing. And so when I transitioned into coaching, I was like, what are the things that I really loved about my coaches? And what are the things that I really did not like about my coaches? Or the things that if I was doing it, I would do it differently. And for me, the biggest thing was coaching every athlete differently.
Yeah.
Every single person learns differently. Like if you scream at me, I'm going to shut down. There's no point to yell at me because it won't happen. Where
Sure.
some people need you to be a little bit meaner, some need to like you to coddle them, some need you to explain the physics behind it. Like every single athlete is different and unique. And for me, the biggest, most important part of like the transition was me understanding that and understanding that when I'm coaching each individual. There's not a one size fits all model to make you the best. Now, granted, yes, science could tell you like all the best things to do, but each athlete is like different and unique. And so I wanted to really pull out the best in each person and create like specific programs for each athlete, make them very unique to them, find out what they like and what they don't like. But I also think like my career was not always positive. There was a lot of like negative things that
Mhm.
happened. And so I think going into coaching in an empathetic way and like understanding like fear is real. Being afraid to do things is absolutely
Yeah.
real. And as a coach, you have to be understanding of that. Or when athletes had issues with like eating disorders and stuff, like being mindful about those type of things and having those conversations with the athletes in
Yeah.
a sympathetic, empathetic way, as opposed to this is how we're going to do it. I'm just your coach. Like, I didn't want to be their best friend, but I wanted them to feel like
Yeah.
I understood where they were coming from and I could help them through whatever, because then they're more likely to actually be successful, have a positive experience, and enjoy it. And for me, I didn't want anyone to just come to practice and be miserable. I wanted them to actually enjoy it and love it and get the positive things out of it and not feel like it was tearing them down all the time.
I think that's such a good point is just in reflection like the coaches that obviously coach us throughout the years how there's so many different styles of coaching. I know I could at least speak from my gosh, I don't want to age myself but like it was like probably early 2000s and it was definitely and I think just during that time almost in many different sports but it was very much authoritarian style coaching and I definitely I resonated with that and like what you were talking about like if somebody if a coach were to like scream at you like I would definitely shut down but the thing of it was is that our coaches I could definitely speak from the fact like we did not have any type of psychological harm or like just any type of mental health issues back then like I said there was not a different type of style coaching to compare it to so in all fairness. But I can say that that particular style of coaching, it really, I think it helped me personally when it came to that discipline and always aiming to be like the best that you could be. You know what I mean? I always wanted to make my coaches proud, right? But I love how you talk about that, just different experiences that you've had as an athlete and how you would transfer that over, obviously, to your athletes. And when it comes to coaching philosophy, how would you describe your coaching philosophy?
Sure. So I very much believe, like I said before, like every single athlete is different and unique, and that there's not a one size fits all model to do it. So, like, if you ask me, like, my specific philosophy, it is that there isn't one because every single person is different, unique, needs to be treated differently. Now, I also, at the same time, think that you have to have the same standards, guidelines, policies, and procedures for everyone. So, you know exactly what I expect from you at all times, you know, like when to come to practice, what to do, how to make things happen. And then if you don't follow those, whatever the rules might be, you know what your repercussions for your actions are. Because it's so hard if it's like, well, she favors this person or she favors that person, or, you know,
Yeah.
he gets away with whatever he wants. I don't care if you're the little kid or the Olympian. I'm going to treat you the exact same way when it comes to my expectations from you, which I think is so important because I want you to get the most out of the experience and I want you to be the most successful. So
Yeah.
I treat you differently as an athlete, but as like a team and a policy and procedures, I am very like upfront and direct. And I do the same thing when I teach. It's like, this is what I expect from you. And then, you know, going into it and you're not wondering, okay, what's going to make her mad or what is not acceptable behavior. So I think for my philosophy, it's that you have to hold everyone to the same standards, but then you have to treat everyone
Yeah.
unique based on what they're going to need to get the most out of themselves.
No, I completely agree. And I know I could at least speak from not NCAA level, but coaching Florida State University, their club team in gymnastics. And what you said, I think is so it's huge, like to set those expectations up front, because I love gymnastics and getting into those workouts and stuff. Like I wanted those athletes to have fun. I wanted to have fun. I loved being back in the gym, and quite frankly, like it was sometimes hard to come back as a coach and know that, you know, you really like, we obviously spoke about this, but like I knew I wasn't going to be flipping and stuff. So it was hard to kind of transition into that coaching role. But I really like, I thrived. I loved coaching. But back to that point of just laying down the expectations up front. So there's no misunderstanding, there's no miscommunication with any of the gymnasts. And I love how you mentioned too of treating everybody equal, if it was like higher level athletes that you were coaching, or maybe those like in the middle, but everybody was treated the same. So there wasn't that sense of favoritism, because I think like we've seen that before. And I think as far as working out together, even though at least speaking for gymnastics and obviously in diving too, but it's a very much an individualistic sport. And I wanted to do everything to make my coaches proud. And so I think having that, like I said, just laying that foundation right from the beginning, there's not going to be favoritism. I'm going to treat all the athletes the same. I think that's so incredibly important. So thank you for sharing that, Chelsea, because I always love to talk about the athlete transitioning into coaching. I think that's many things that obviously people experience if they were an athlete, they naturally go into coaching. And so this is so exciting. So now you are a professor in sport management at the University of Alabama. So, Dr. Ale, if you could please just like speak to that experience.
Sure. So I was fortunate enough when I was at Florida State to be able to teach classes and excuse me, and to be a graduate assistant and teacher assistant
Sure.
for other classes. And so um, the reason I actually went back to school was because of teaching.
Yeah.
So I was a coach and I loved it, but COVID happened and our pool shut down for about a year and a half. And so when I thought about why I liked diving and why I liked coaching, it was about building better humans. Like, yes, I like teaching you how to like flip and twist and make Olympians and stuff like that. But it's cheesy as it sounded. I really enjoyed I like being a mentor, a role model, a leader. And I felt like I was genuinely helping the athletes become better people and better humans. And so I was like, well, what can I do that a pandemic isn't going to take away? And I was like, well, if I became a college professor, then I can be like that positive influence for the students. So I can be a mentor, a leader, a role model, and hopefully a pandemic won't shut me down. And so I went back to school for that. So it's been an interesting shift because it's not coaching anymore, it's teaching. So it's a little bit different. But my goal with it is really like, and again, it sounds cheesy and I know it does, but I really want to build good humans. And I don't think we always do the best job of like setting our students up for success in their future careers.
Sure.
And my ultimate goal is to take what we're learning in the classroom, have them think critically about it, have it relate to their
Yeah.
life, have them learn from each other, and then be able to use that in their future careers. Like, I don't want them just to memorize a whole bunch of terms and definitions. I want them to actually be able to like learn about something, think about something differently, experience something differently. And then I want them to become better adults, individuals, workers. And, we've all worked with people that are great coworkers, and we've
Mhm.
worked with people that are not always great coworkers. And so my
Yeah.
hope is that the things that I'm teaching the students will actually like have meaningful impact and change on their lives, and that they're getting something from it. And the nice thing about teaching
Yeah.
sports is that it's an easy topic to talk about, right? Like we love sports. It's easy. It's been interesting being in Alabama because everyone loves Alabama football here. And sometimes I have to remind people that there are other sports other than football. So like diving and gymnastics are sports. But it's nice because it's not super challenging things to talk about. Now, I did teach social issues in the fall, which can be a very touchy, topics depending on what we're talking about. But yeah, so it's been a shift and a change. So it's been good. And it's I miss FSU, but it's nice to be somewhere else. And the people at Alabama are so nice and helpful, and there's so much autonomy and support. And so it's been a really nice shift to come here.
Well, congratulations on that position because just going through that PhD program and then earning that position as a professor, I mean, that really like speaks volumes, especially at University of Alabama, obviously very large university too. And just as you mentioned, like huge in sports. We always hear about Alabama football, of course, but the one thing I really wanted to ask you is you have a tremendous amount of experience, whether it was literally being an athlete, coaching, hospitality, and sport, all these various experiences. So, how have you been able to incorporate that and share those experiences with those students? Any particular experience that you do typically like speak to students about in the classroom?
So I actually like I think that's one of the things that really makes me, I don't want to say unique, but makes me a
Yeah.
better professor. It's funny, when I was filling out my CV, I had a professor tell me, "You don't need to put any of your hospitality background on there. You don't need to put any of your other stuff." And I was like, "No, this is what makes me
Yeah.
unique and different." And I feel like here it's great because we're actually sport management is part of the hospitality department. And
Okay.
so I'm able to kind of use both sides of that. But for me, it's all about the real world example. So if I
Yeah.
teach a sales class, I talk about the things that I've done in sales and how, and I like to use examples of like sales techniques or things that have worked or things that have don't work. And I can give
Yeah.
like examples of what I've done in the past. In my collegiate athletics class, I can talk
Huge.
about what I did as a college coach or what I have seen, what it's like to be
Mhm.
an athlete. And I think it's just so important to be able to bring in those real world examples.
Yeah.
And that's what I do a lot in class. And I don't mind making fun of myself or talking about different things. I try to be a little bit cheesy sometimes because I want them to, get involved with it. But I am constantly using my life, my experiences, and the things that I've learned throughout my career to sort of help them, because whether it's a good example or a bad example, they're able to see like the real world, like how what we're learning actually affects people and what they're
Yeah.
doing. And so for me, that's a lot of how I teach. I'm constantly using real world examples of either something that I've done, something I've seen,
Yeah.
or something that I've been able to experience. So I don't have one specific thing because that's like all of my teaching is like,
Sure.
how can I bring my career and my experience into helping you understand a topic a little bit easier?
No, absolutely. And I have to agree with you. Like I think it's excellent to be able to obviously be a professor and assign those assignments and stuff in class, but then to really expand like their mindset as to what it really is like when you apply what you learn in the classroom into that professional experience, because I do the same thing. I share with students, I'm completely transparent with my failures as well as my successes, because I think that's what's really important. I mean, we could always talk about like our success isn't on paper. I always talk about this, but it looks so smooth, right? Like you go from one thing, just like yourself, like you were an athlete, coach, professor, but there's so much that we learn along the way that's not necessarily documented on a resume. And so sharing those things, I know even just from speaking, I know you spoke about it too, but that idea of just like almost incorporating some humor, just within reason, obviously, but making it fun. I think incorporating just that fun element in the classroom, I always want students to walk away knowing that not only did they learn something valuable, they're able now to apply it into the real world, but that learning can be fun. Because I know when I was back in my undergraduate years, it was that idea. I had like a different view on education where it was so serious. I went in there, I took the exam and I left and that was it. But you speak about this in other positions that you've had, but those experiences, how they actually mold you and provide you that insight to become that professor that you've always wanted to become, just by sharing, like I said, your own experiences. So within the realm of being a professor, what is maybe something that maybe surprised you once you fully entered this particular position at University of Alabama?
I guess for me, it's something I sort of had to deal with in coaching too. You can't
Yeah.
want more than the athletes or the students.
Yeah.
I want to be the best, and I think you should get straight A's and you should have 4.0 GPA and whatever. But that's not everyone's goal and not everyone's life plan. I'm
Sure.
also very like, you better be on time, you better turn assignments in on time, you better like do those things. And that's also not everyone's plan. And I think it's been interesting to sort of see a little bit more of like getting to acknowledge that not everyone wants to be the best and not everyone wants to do everything 100%. And that's okay. Some people are perfectionists and they want to get good grades, and some people are totally fine not. But I think it's just kind of being more mindful that not everyone wants to always be the best. And some people are totally fine with getting B's in their classes and stuff like that.
Sure.
But I always like in my head, I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't you want to get an A? And that's not always everyone's thought process.
No, 100%. And I think that's a very good point because I could remember the first time when I stepped in a classroom, that was, my gosh, I think it was actually during COVID. It was during COVID because I had to switch to online. So not only was it the first time teaching in a classroom, but also experiencing how to transition onto an online platform. But you're right. I think that there's different motivations in everybody. And I think throughout the years, that is something that has certainly resonated with me because sport just teaches you, at least from my experience, and obviously hearing, your story too as well. But I always wanted to be the best that I could be. And you talk about that like competitive mindset. I'm so curious, Chelsea, Dr. Ale, what your thoughts are with that transition of having that competitive mindset in sport and how that's maybe, how that could help an athlete transition that particular mindset into the classroom.
Sure. I mean, so we've talked about how positive sports are just in general. And I think it's important to realize that you can be like, if you have that competitive mindset,
Yeah.
competing against yourself in the classroom and competing against your fellow classmates. Now, you don't want your classmates to do bad, right? You want them to do the best, but always kind of like pushing yourself to be a little bit better, but also pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. Sports is not always like, let's stay in our comfort zone and things are going to be perfect and happy. If you asked me to do public speaking when I was in college, I would have cried and shaked and like sweat, and it would have been a nightmare. And now I'm a professor and I can stand up in front of class and talk all day because I've pushed myself out of my comfort zone. And so when students have to give like presentations or they have to get up in front of the class or I ask them to answer a question, being able to be like, it's okay to, push yourself a little bit, but it's also okay to be vulnerable. And I think too, like I very much want my class to be a place of respect at all times. Like, and I always tell everyone at the beginning of the semester, like, I'm going to say something wrong at some point. You'll probably say something wrong at some point. We're
Yeah.
not perfect. Someone will have a different experience than you might. And let's go into it from like a place of like learning and growth. But
Excellent.
so I think if we go into it being like, it's okay to not be perfect and then strive for
Um,
that, I think it helps. And so in sports, right, we're always trying to push ourselves. So in the classroom, it's the same thing. Like, try and do better on one exam than you did on the last exam. Try and push yourself more. Use the time management skills you learned in sports to actually turn in your assignments on time and follow a schedule. When
yeah.
college, you have your social life, you have clubs and other commitments, you've got school, you've got mean professors making you do homework, you've got like things. And so if you can stick with a schedule and actually be like, okay, well, when I was in high school, we had practice in the morning, then we had class, and then we had practice, and then we had dinner. And then,
Mhm.
where you get to college and it's like a free for all, you can do whatever you want with your life. I think sports helps us do that. But I also think it
Mhm.
helps us overcome when things don't go well. Okay, you did really bad on a
Yeah.
test. Don't let that ruin your entire
Yeah.
life. Right? Like, you can come back from that. One test is not going to destroy your grade unless your professor really just has you do one test. It'll be okay. It just teaches you so many like valuable things that can transition into school and into your jobs and your career.
No, that's wonderful. And I wanted to take it back to that, just focusing on public speaking and having those nerves, having those, that sense of butterflies. I could totally relate to that. I remember. I do. I remember like it was yesterday when I first got up in front of the class. And I want to say it was only 20 people, my first class. It could have been 40, but I don't quite remember. But regardless, there was something about standing up in front of that classroom and thinking to myself, okay, they have one name to remember. And I love getting to know people's names and really getting to know people. And now here I am, with 20 people. But pushing yourself out of that comfort zone, I think that could relate to so many things, not obviously just in the classroom, but you grow so much. You learn along the way. And I know you had mentioned it too, but just that idea of when you do experience different things and maybe somebody like takes something like you said, focusing on respect, but maybe somebody says out of context and stuff, you're able to learn from that. And I do think that the classroom is one of the best places to make those mistakes first, and to grow from them during that semester, to be able to then propel them into the professional workforce and to already have all of those experiences already done, so to speak, in the classroom. So you don't make those mistakes moving forward. So I just think the classroom is such a valuable place to learn, to experience those, like I said, successes, overcoming, the at least it was for me, but that sense of like butterflies getting in front of the classroom. And if you have to do that in the professional realm, well, it's that much easier. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Dr. Ale. As we move forward, I would love for you to speak about your experience, particularly in hospitality. You had certainly mentioned it a little bit, but I would just love to for you to expand upon your experience in hospitality and sport.
Sure. So, like I said, I have a huge hospitality background. A lot of it
Yeah.
is in, bars and restaurants. But I was fortunate the last 3 years well, prior to moving here, to work at our civic center, which has like basketball games. We have concerts and shows. And hospitality is so much intertwined in sports. Like, when
Yeah.
people don't realize like how much they're intertwined, but if you think about it, sports are all about putting on a good experience and a show for people now, and it's all about making as much money as possible. And so, a lot of what we do in sports is hospitality side.
Yeah.
But I loved my hospitality background. One of my students actually at FSU, he came up to me and he said, I want a career in sports. Like, I'm trying to figure out an internship. I said, well, I can hire you. I said, I do catering and suites. So
Um,
it's not actually like sports, but you're in that sports environment.
sure.
And he was like, okay. And so he did it and he still works there. And he's been really successful with it. But I've done that with a few of my students because they get to see the behind the scenes. We
Yeah.
always think like coaching, athletic directors, like the front end of it.
Sure.
But there's more like behind the scenes that happens in sports. And so even though like I wasn't working with the team, we still had to set up like the press rooms and the media areas and where the fans win and all these like other aspects of it. And it's nice to kind of be able to have that like personal relationship and to be able to help build the experience, but on the back end. And you get to see like all the
Yeah.
behind the scene things. It also gives you a whole new respect for how sporting events and events take place. One of my favorite things to do as a coach was to make camps and clinics and to just run organizations. And so on the hospitality side, it's also just building positive relationships, making people love them. I
Yeah.
remember we hosted in Tallahassee a couple diving meets, and everyone's like, "These are the best meets we've ever been to. Like, they're run
Oh,
so well. Everyone's so nice." And it's all about creating like a positive experience and like
yeah.
using the hospitality we have to just create this like wonderful environment. And so it's been nice to when I can combine the two loves because I feel like I'm creating a really exciting experience for people.
No, that's fantastic. And when you talk about just having that like positive experience at a sporting event, I can't speak from obviously working in hospitality, but my husband and I always go to at least one meet per year still at the University of Florida for gymnastics, just out of like, reminiscing on those good days. But that experience, I think it's a very like I take it like more personal because I grew up in that. Our coach would literally take us to those meets when I was like 8 years old. And so it was literally such a positive experience for me at that age to envision, wow, I really would love to be a UF gymnast someday. But now going there with my husband, I mean, the whole production, it's not just a gymnastics meet, 4 events and leave. It is legitimately a production. I mean, you have people coming out, you have families, you have obviously even girls from teams. Sometimes they still do that. They'll bus like a team there, enjoy the night. You have retirees, but it's that idea of right before the meet, they turn the lights off, everything that goes on. I mean, down to the like second almost. And you really do like you have to appreciate that because it's not like they just do it that day and it, comes to magic that night. So I just always want you to know like what you do is very well respected because a lot of the times that does not necessarily get recognized into how much time and effort goes into that.
Yeah, it's amazing, like all the little behind the scene things that have to happen to make everything run so smoothly. And for me, everyone on the outside would always be like, "This is ran great," and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, we had this fire and this fire and this fire, and we had to put this one out, and we didn't have staff for this." But it was kind of fun because it was like always something different. I was always like running around doing all sorts of different things. But as long as the customers are enjoying it, then that's really like, that and the athletes. Like as long as we're
Yeah.
making sure that everyone is enjoying the experience, then what we do on the back end, it doesn't matter if it goes good or bad, as long as no one has any idea. As long
Yeah.
as it looks like it's going good, then we're fine.
That's fantastic. And I definitely like, I'm kind of going like around, like, I mean, from coaching to leadership to obviously being a professor into hospitality. But I am so curious to pick your brain, Dr. Ale, about when we talk about like mental performance for athletes, a lot of the times, I think, especially today, to understand what you really have to go through to achieve success and really what that looks like. So, do you have like any tips when it comes to mental performance in any sport for that matter, how to prepare?
Sure. So I think the nice thing is that now we can have these conversations.
Yeah.
We talk about this a lot in class. Like, if you talked about mental health 20 years ago, it
Yeah.
was not received nearly like what it is now. Like, it's like, oh, you're crazy. You have to go talk to someone. Where now it's like more acceptable. And so,
Sure.
my first advice is always like, it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to have feelings and emotions, and it's okay to be acknowledging of that because if you hide those things, then that's when it kind of like gets bigger, gets worse, becomes more of an issue.
Yeah.
And it's all right to actually be able to like confide in someone and talk to them about it.
Mm.
Um, I think like when Simone Biles in 2020, she had the twisties. You had the people that supported her, but you had a lot of people that had a lot of hate towards her. And I was like, as an athlete that has actually dealt with that personally,
Yeah.
I totally understand what she's going through. And for me, I
Mhm.
think it's important that we talk about that and we say, like,
Sure.
look, like this is a real thing. She's not making it up that she's getting lost.
Mhm.
She's having trouble. And so having the conversations about like, okay, is this happening to you? And how can we help you through it? And
Yeah.
just being more open with that dialogue. I ran into a lot of fear issues when I was an athlete. I probably
Yeah.
would have been much better if I wasn't so in my own mental head, but
Sure.
I wasn't comfortable talking about it with people. And I think my
Mhm.
biggest advice is just if you are dealing with something to talk about it, but also know that you're
Yeah.
not alone because
Yeah.
everyone is dealing with something. Like no one's life is perfect and no one's dealing with some type of stress that someone else isn't having. And so know that you're not alone in that situation, that there's always
Mhm.
someone that you can talk to or that can help you through that process.
Mhm.
And then also just take it like one step at a time, one thing at a time, one day at a time. Like I always used to
Yeah.
make my athletes shake my hand after practice as a sign of respect,
Aw,
but it's like the practice is over. So if something really
yeah.
bad happened, like don't bring that into tomorrow. Like it's over, we're moving
Mhm.
on. Let's come back the next day fresh instead of like dwelling on it. Like if you did a really great dive in a competition, perfect. Be excited about it, be happy about it, and go to the
Yeah.
next dive excited. But if you had a really bad dive, move on. Pretend like it didn't happen. Like you can't fix it. You can't go back and change it.
Yeah.
So just trying to like learn from your mistakes and take advantage of the positive things and always like
Yeah.
I'm overly positive when it comes to stuff because I'm like, just if you dwell on the negative, if you're always like, "Oh, I'm the worst, I suck, I'm terrible, I'm never getting
Yeah.
better, then you're going to keep becoming in that negative downward spiral. Where if you
Sure.
constantly are like focusing on like, okay, I did this well. I did this well. I made
Yeah.
this achievement. I got better at this, or this one really positive. Then you're actually going to be a lot more positive. And I also
Mhm.
think, people say fake it till you make it, but I think
Yeah.
it's fake it till you become it. I think you can trick your
Ooh.
mind into being happier, more positive, doing things that you didn't think you could do because you're like, yes, I can do this. I can do this. I got this. And you can sort
Yeah.
of force yourself into making better mental things happen.
No, 100%. I mean, I agree with you when it comes to really focusing on the positivity side of it and not like toxic positivity because we all have bad days inevitably. I mean, people even ask me like, do you ever have a bad day? Yes, of course. Like it's not always great, right? But I do think your mind is so incredibly powerful. I mean, just to attract things into your life, just from my personal experience, just explaining that. But I think that there's really something to be said about focusing more so on the positive things and what you were talking about, I think is a good life lesson too, is this idea of when you do make a mistake, especially in sport, it taught me that you're right. You can't keep dragging it on day in and day out. I mean, you probably experienced it too with how many hours, in the facility, like diving, as far as gymnastics in the gym constantly, those were like 5, 6 hours days. And if you were to go home, take that, negative attitude with you at home, you barely get any rest. You have to wake up the next day, go to school, go to gym again for another 5 or 6 hours. Like, what good does it do? So I always like, and I've spoken about this too, but we all make mistakes. So to be able to learn from those mistakes, digest it, reflect upon it, but then you're right, you got to keep moving forward. I think as long as you learn from those lessons, that's really all you could ask for. And I think that from sport to literally life, I think that's very much translatable. And so I'm really happy that you said that, Chelsea. Excuse me, Dr. Ale. I keep saying Chelsea. I apologize. Um,
Um,
but I also wanted to ask you, some athletes thrive on pressure. I mean, just in that pressure moment, it is coming down to you to perform for a team. What advice could you maybe provide athletes who maybe just need that extra confidence when put in that pressure position?
so I think part of that goes back to like understanding, each athlete and understanding yourself. Like some
Yeah.
people, I've seen athletes that are not very good, like in an everyday basis, and then all of a sudden they're in like this high stake competition and they are phenomenal. And you're like, where's that every day? And then you also see the athletes that are amazing in practice and then they get to the competition, they just crumble. And you're like, you're better than this. And so I
Yeah.
think, it's being mindful of that is huge because you have to acknowledge, like, okay, I am good under pressure or I am not. And if
Yeah.
you're not, okay, how do we fix that? And what you need to
Yeah.
do is kind of like remove the pressure from the situation. So
That's a good
if
point.
you're really consistent in practice and you're really good at practice and you're just like carefree and enjoying yourself, then in a meet setting, put
Yeah.
yourself in a practice mindset. Put yourself in a situation where you're like, okay, I'm fun, I'm carefree, I'm listening to music, I'm dancing with my friends, I'm doing whatever I want.
Yeah.
If you find though that you need to be like in the zone, okay, put your headphones on, be in your zone, focus on that, and get yourself ready in that situation. Like everyone has like
Yeah.
pre-meet routines or pre-competition routines.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to find the right one because like I would need to have like headphones on, don't talk to me, I'm in my zone, do what I need to do. And then I'd have friends that are like just socializing and chatting and hanging out. I'm like, if I do that, then I'm not focused enough. Where they needed to do that because it calmed them and made them a little bit more like, okay, this is just practice. This is just, relaxing. But I also think you know how to do whatever you're doing, whatever your sport might be. You've put in the time, you've put in the effort. So don't worry if there's 1,000 people watching you, 1,000,000 people watching you. Like, do the best that you can do, and you'll be fine. Like, don't expect yourself.
Yeah.
You're not all of a sudden going to get a lot better just because you have people watching you. You're only going to be as good as you are. Now you can be, a little bit better, a little bit worse, but
Sure.
you're going to do what you've learned how to do and what you've put the time and resources into. So
Mhm.
just trust that your body's going to do it and that you're going to be okay. Because I think a lot of
Yeah.
times people expect themselves to all of a sudden be like so much better in a competition. It's like,
Yeah.
well, that would be amazing. Yes. Do you want to become all of a sudden an Olympian and you're not prepared for that? Sure. Knowing like where your level is and being okay with that and keep pushing yourself to be better, but don't expect yourself all of a sudden to be someone that you're not. And so
Yeah.
I think that's important too, because we put so much pressure on to be the best, but just be the best that you can be, not the best that the world wants to see or whatever it might be. Because I think that we always want to compare ourselves to other people, but it's also important just to acknowledge
Yeah.
how good we can be with it.
No, I love that you mentioned that, just that that sense or that idea of, consistently comparing oneself to another. And that kind of leads me into this like concept of perfectionism too, of always striving to be the best. How, like, what type of advice could you provide somebody who maybe perfectionism has kept them back, whether that be in a professional career or in athletics? So, what advice could you provide, Dr. Ale, when it comes to perfectionism?
Sure. So, as someone who is a perfectionist and always wants to be the best, I have actually had to like teach myself how to be okay with not being the best.
Yeah.
Like there's sports that I've done before that I'm like, I don't want to play that. I'm not going to win, which is not a good way to do it. So you have to remember like to find like the fun in things.
Mhm.
So for me, when I got back into diving in masters, like it's hard because I am a perfectionist and I want to be the athlete I was when I was 14, but I'm
Yeah.
a lot older than that. That's not realistic. So I have to look for the small wins. Like, okay, I'm socializing with my friends. I'm doing something that I haven't done in years. I'm getting to be in a pool and being okay with that. And then I think in like life and work, it's
Yeah.
okay to not always be perfect, but it's not okay to be complacent.
Yeah.
So always learning and always growing. And if you're not the best, okay, well, why not? Evaluate it. Like, what could I do to be better? But not in a way
Yeah.
where like your whole life is like, "Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, I didn't get a perfect score on this, like, my life is over." Like, okay, I could have probably done
Yeah.
better, but also, like, it's okay not to always be perfect.
Yeah.
And I've also learned that if you actually give yourself a little bit more grace, you're typically a little bit happier because
Oh,
if you focus
yes.
so much on always being the best and always doing everything perfect, like, sometimes that extra little step you took wasn't necessary and you're not
Yeah.
any happier because of it. And so I kind of learned it was like my dissertation. It's very long, massive. I
Yeah.
put a lot of heart and effort into it. But at one point I was like, it's never going to be perfect. I just want to be, I want this to be the best that it's going to be. And I want to
Mhm.
graduate and be done with it because I could have spent another 5 years making it better. But it's not going to be perfect. And I think that it's also okay to sort of be like, it's not, you're never always going to be perfect. You can strive to become better than you
Yeah.
were and be okay in learning. But at some point, your happiness is also important. And it's not worth like over stressing about certain things. Like my happiness at the end of my PhD was not there. So I was, let me be done with this. But I think that I was trying to be so perfect. Like I had a
Yeah.
full-time job, I was teaching, and I expected myself to get straight A's the entire time I was in my PhD program. And I was like, this is killing me. And I think looking back, I wish I had been like, I don't need to be perfect. I just need to do the best that I can actually do in this moment. And if that's not, getting straight A's, then that's okay because my sanity
Mhm.
is more important than that. And I think a lot of perfectionists struggle with like taking that step back and saying, I'm okay not being perfect in this moment.
I think that's such a good point, and just even kind of expanding upon that thought, but, like, really enjoying the journey, that's something that I've had to be really cognizant in, like, different chapters in my life, like, just for example, when you talk about that PhD program, obviously, we both went through it, and it's intense. It is extremely challenging. I could speak to the fact, at least personally, it was one of the most hardest things I've ever done in my life. Like gymnastics, there was some like maybe some natural talent that you could develop, but with this, I mean, it pushed me literally like physically to stay up sometimes, to wake up extremely early, but then just mentally, it could take that toll. But at least when I reflect back, I do wish I could have like enjoyed that journey because once you walk across that stage, it's like what, like 30 seconds essentially for what, on average 4 years. So I think it's all about like finding that sense of happiness. It may be like grueling, whatever you're going through, or you may have to really like push through some tough times, some challenging times, but also taking that time to be happy and to reflect upon maybe what you've accomplished and just like I said, taking that time to realize how far you've come but where you're headed. And I think that's something I've always struggled with. It's always like, okay, what's next? What's next?
No, I did that for the whole PhD. I was like, I have to be the best. I have to go through this. I have to, and I was like killing myself because I was like, I need to graduate. Like, I need to do all this. And then looking back, I'm like, I that was 4 years of my life. Like, what? Like, it all went so fast that I wish I had relaxed a little bit. I wish I had not been
Yeah.
so worried about being so perfect in it, and I actually enjoyed the process a little bit more because I think other people in our program got to enjoy life through that, and I was just like, I have to be the best. And so it definitely taught me that I need to actually take some time for myself, and I don't always have to go at everything 100%, and it's okay to like give it 75, 80% at some points in my life.
I love that. I absolutely love that. And I'm glad like we both could relate to that because I think like that sense of perfectionism could definitely happen a lot with elite athletes just in general. Like I said, I always wanted to make my coaches proud, my family proud, my dad. And I think that sometimes like as you do move on and you mature and you grow, you realize it really is. It's about that journey. It's about that personal growth, making those mistakes, reflecting, learning, moving forward, taking those lessons that you need, to move forward. But there's so much overlap between sport, life, and career. But Dr. Ale, if you could please round out this wonderful podcast, very informative podcast with something, maybe a positive phrase or a positive quote.
Sure. So my one of my favorite quotes is good, better, best. Never let it rest. Always make good better and better best. I just always think like you can always grow and learn and like it you never want to be complacent and stay like where you're at. And I think, if you enjoy your life and if you constantly are trying to learn more, try new things, reach out, don't ever just like settle for one thing. Always try to actually learn more and be better and help other people and do stuff. Not saying you have to be like a stretched thin, but I just, for me, it's all about always trying to be a little bit better than I was the day before
Yeah.
and always trying to help someone become a little bit better than they were the day before.
I love that. And Dr. L, you are such an inspiration. I mean, just this whole time, you've had a multitude of experience in various different career paths, and what you've learned and what you've shared too in this podcast. I'm motivated. I'm inspired. So I know, of course, our listeners are, and I just want to thank you for coming on this podcast and sharing all of your knowledge. So I wish you the absolute best as you move forward.
Thank you. Well, thank you for having me. I'm glad that I was able to come on and it's been great chatting with you today.